Center of Art and Interculture organized the conference, The Art of Changing Scene. What was the objective with this conference?
I think the objective was to... Actually, we wanted to do three things. We wanted to emphasize the necessity of changing scene in terms of opening up our cultural environment, opening up the cultural facilities and the cultural venues, in terms of new narratives, inclusion of the narrative stories that are not told, the stories of the suburbs, the stories of the immigrants, but also opening up the scene in terms of recruitment on stage, in terms of immigrant actors, immigrant potential, but also the recruitment of an immigrant audience. So what we really wanted to do was to say, well, if 1/5 of the Copenhagen public, the audience of the municipalities, inhabitants, and about 1/10, maybe even 15% of the Danish population have another background than a European, they are not reflected in the artistic movement. But those people are still part of paying the party. So if we really want to democratize the Danish audience and the Danish art and the Danish culture, we would also have to open in and really involve and include all the potentials, but also all the people that are paying for Danish culture. So that's one objective. The other objective was to show the huge potential which is lying there in a group which is not included. All the, not just the narratives, but also all the professionalism, the possibilities, but also the true fact that if you increase the audience, you increase your own possibilities as an institution to get black lines on the bottom line. Meaning that you can increase your income, you can increase the audience in terms of size, you can get full salons and so forth. And the third objective was to show that we are missing something quite important in the Danish debate. We're still focusing very much on a national cultural political idiom, an imagination that in Denmark we have a Danish culture. We have canonized our culture. But the truth is, of course, that Danish culture is on the move. It's always been on the move. It will always be on the move. And now one of the major injections into the Danish cultural life is actually the benefits of migration. But we're not using it, we're not seeing it, because it's stereotyped into this us and them. And if you're talking about multicultural cultural scene, or you're talking about a cultural diversity, you're very much seen by the present government, but even by the media, as a naive person who is more or less letting in potential terrorists or people who would like to revolt the society, which is not necessarily the truth. The truth could be that we have a number of stories on love, on parenthood, on children, on upbringing, of all the things that every one of us really share, but they're not getting out there. Then there is a number of hidden visions and initiatives with the conference. One of them was to show that to some extent we are still seeing color. It's still very difficult for a black actress like Ellen Newman, for instance, to get the role of Ophelia. We're still very much lugged in a very old-fashioned, very elitist, post-colonial picture of what Danish art is and what Danish art should be, which is not necessarily reflected in terms of the best artists. So if we want to let in the best artists, we will have to be colorblind. We will have to make ourselves colorblind. That's one of the hidden agendas. And the other one is to emphasize, of course, to all the leaders, to the gatekeepers, to the cultural political architects, that they are not doing what they should be doing. We want them to recognize that they are not covering the field, they are not conducting their institutions in terms of being for all the Danes. They're just for part of the Danes. And they seem to be quite satisfied with that. But it's a short-term solution. If they want to do a long-term solution, they will have to open up the spectre. So one of the things that we said yesterday was that we really want people to in a sense, be quite disobedient and report back to the decision makers on a local level, municipal level, in Aarhus, Copenhagen, Odense, or even the state level, the national level, what they are doing in terms of of inclusion, because this has to do with audience relationships, this has to do with really developing a community feeling around art without compromising with the quality of the art, without compromising with the liberty of the artist, because that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about expanding the field. So those were more or less the intentions.
Denmark has signed the United Nations Convention about Cultural Diversity, but until now Aarhus has been the only town in Denmark who has implemented cultural diversity in their culture policy. So what is necessary to do in Denmark so other towns can follow?
Well, the simple answer to that question could be that they would have to implement it because it's already signed, and by that it should be part of a legislative process. The truth is, of course, that the average municipality would rather conduct the politics of the possible than implement something that could be regarded as controversial. So whenever it's controversial, if it's controversial, it should not be controversial in Copenhagen. So why Copenhagen hasn't done it, you should really ask Pia Allerslev or one of the other mayors why it has not been implemented, because I can't do that. But on the other hand, I would say most of the smaller towns with a higher degree of confrontation in the political environment, there it could be quite controversial. So that could be one reason. But I think this has also to do with the media. This has to do with you in terms of the media reflecting quite one-sidedly the political discourse. I think we have lost the critical mass in Danish media. If the Danish media, if the major newspapers, if the broadcasting corporations would rather reflect the complexity of this question, we would not have that kind of one-sided dimension in the dialogue, in the discourse, in the public debate. So it's also a lack of public debate which is qualified. The debate is quite uninteresting, really, because it's filled with hostility, and it's filled with prejudice, and it's filled with intolerance to some extent, and it's an unrecognized intolerance which makes it even worse, really.
Many people in Denmark, institutions and even politicians and parties, see cultural diversity as a problem. But the fact is that the most of Danish people speak more than Danish. They speak 2 or 3 languages or whatever. So how can we change this perspective towards a more positive perspective towards cultural diversity?
I think that we would like to see ourselves as liberals and quite modern, and a quite modern society, and we have managed really well in creating a society that is embracing and dynamic to some extent. But on the other hand, it's a very provincial society as well, and it's very much conducted about 3 key identity factors, one of them being a small country, meaning that we seem to be, even on a political level, quite afraid of integration with major countries. This could be one of the reasons, this is supposed to be one of the reasons behind the Danish referendums on the EU matters, and the unwillingness to participate fully in the EU process. Though we are doing it even though, but we're not members of all the parts, the Maastricht Treaty and the Lisbon Agreement and so forth. On the other hand, I think we're afraid. There is a tendency in Denmark to respond on the effects of globalization by being quite regressive. And I think all this about the idiom, pointing out immigrants as the problem, also has to do with some kind of fear for globalization. I think there are 2 tendencies in the world. The one is to try to embrace globalization. We see that very much in the tiger countries in Asia, in Shanghai and Taiwan and South Korea, but also more and more in some of the European countries who really seem to be moving very, very fast. For instance, the Czech Republic. We've seen it in Hungary, where might have gone too fast. We saw it definitely in Ireland, where it may even have overheated in the economy. But a willingness to embrace the possibilities of globalization. Whereas in Denmark, it's regressive. We rather want to lock the barriers and stay out of it and say, oh, pooh, don't come too near. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is that the political environment has quite cynically made an analysis, and this is the present government, but even the opposition, where they tend to say, well, we can do this as long as the majority have some kind of benefit, and the benefit should be economic. So as long as there is an economic benefit in exclusion, I don't think there is a political will to change it. The very moment the politicians realize that the economic benefit is no longer in exclusion, it's in inclusion, I think we will see a political change. So to some extent there is even quite a high degree of political cynicism in the way that we conduct these issues in Denmark.
The lack of cultural diversity policy, implementation of that, has its consequences. Like, for instance, it's very difficult for institutions in Denmark who work with the cultural diversity to get economical support to develop their work. So how do you think that also could change?
I think that a few years ago, one of the major civil servants in the political department, in the culture department, said, "Don't use the forbidden F word. Don't use the word flerkultur, which means multiculturalism, because it's not political comme il faut. You can't do this and expect that the government will support it, because it would immediately put the government in some kind of contradiction with the Danish People's Party." So to the one hand, again, it's locked by the political agenda and the political logic, what is possible, and you will have to confront the Danish People's Party, which again would lead to some kind of insecureness on the ruling side, which was not in any part's interest at that time. But that has not, I mean, from a political point of view, you can understand it. But in terms of conducting a whole society, it has led to a non-understanding of what multiculturalism, or more like cultural diversity, because it's not about ethnicity. It has been interpreted as a part of as an ethnic question, but it's not. It's about a cultural identity. It's about who we really are as individuals. I mean, I'm Danish, but I'm very much into rhythmical music from all over the world. I believe that I have a profile which makes me unique. People who come here, people who live here, all have profiles, whether they are from Hirtshals, whether they are from Kalundborg, whether they are from Puerto Rico or the Maghreb countries. We all conduct something, and we all try to define us in the environment where we live, and bring in the resources that we carry, especially if we're artists. And if you can't see that, if you can't see the potential lying in that, if you can't see the dollar signs or the krona signs following that in terms of engagement, in terms of community development, then you're quite blind. And this is what has happened in Denmark, that the institutions, but even and here I don't mean the cultural institutions, they might be blind as well. I think they are, unfortunately. But the funding institutions, the municipalities, the cultural departments and so forth, they are quite blind. They don't see the wholeness, they don't see the possibilities and the complexity lying right in front of them. And as long as they don't see that, they can't support it. So to some extent, we have been one great failure in lightening up the potential. And to another extent, you can say they have not even wanted to get into the dialogue because of the political reality. So that's the one thing. Just shortly, I would say, I think that if you should change it, which is the whole aim by a conference like this one, I think one of the major outcomes here is that we have now turned to the political environment, the politicians, the political architects in terms of civil servants on all the levels. We have listen to all the decision makers, and we can now just realize, and we can conclude that, well, they are not really interested. They can't see the point. So I think what we should do is make an Othello. We should turn white into black. And we should show it by doing what the fair trade has been doing, or what the Windcraft did just last week. Use the consumers. The simple power of 500,000 people voting with their feet by going to productions or art experiences or exhibitions or shows or whatever, by interest, and using that. By doing that, we can lift the focus, because the consumer way seems to be the most powerful way to conduct change in this country. So let's do that. So that would be a very, very concrete thing to do. Focus on the consumers, meaning the Danes, or the people living here, what the kind of culture they really want.